our speaker. All right. So Krystle, thank you so much for joining us tonight for the March 8th meeting of the Sacramento Valley chapter of the California Native Plant Society. Krystle Hickman is a TEDx speaker, artist, community scientist, and photographer based in Los Angeles, California. Through artful photography, Krystle strives to increase awareness of the decline in native bee species, as well as highlight their biodiverse ecosystems. Her photography has been featured in the LA Times, children's books, and scientific journals. And Krystle works with gardens like the Los Angeles County Arboretum and Arlington Garden, regularly photographing and documenting their native habitats. She also collects data on rare bee species in the Mojave Desert, Joshua Tree, Anza Borrego, the Santa Monica Mountains, and yards with native gardens and more. So maybe one day I'll get lucky enough.
Yeah.
With that, Krystle, take it away. Thank you again so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for that lovely introduction. I'm going to share my screen here. Okay. Okay, can everyone see this?
We see your screen.
Okay, awesome.
Now, and before you start, if anybody has questions, please drop them in the chat and we'll save them for the end.
Cool. Okay, great. So yeah, again, my name is Krystle Hickman, and this is a presentation I like to call the ABCs of native bees. So yeah, thank you. Oh, we're not scrolling. There we go. Okay, so I primarily do 3 different things. I am an artist. I'm also a photographer, as well as a speaker, and you can see me doing all 3 of those things right here. Regarding artwork, I primarily work with ballpoint pens as well as sugar. These 3 pieces, the one on the left, lower left-hand corner, and the bottom right are all ballpoint pen. The upper right-hand corner is sugar, and obviously a speaker. And regarding my photography, I primarily photograph 3 things. So native bees, the plants they visit, as well as their ecosystems, which you can see all 3 of those things on the right there. Primarily, I photograph in California, but if you notice the bottom, the lower left-hand corner, that's not California. That's actually Belize. So I do travel around a little bit and also photograph bees there as well. So I'm called a community scientist, which I'm sure a lot of you guys already know what this is called already. But just in case, a community scientist is an amateur scientist who conducts scientific research in a field that they don't hold a degree in. A lot of people call that a citizen scientist, but just because words are kind of changing really fast, citizen really in the scientific realm doesn't really mean anymore to a lot of people. If you do or don't hold a degree in what you're studying, it means whether or not you're documented or undocumented. So community scientist is something that a lot of people in the English-speaking world in the US are using just to be more inclusive. So just to make people more inclusive, I use community scientist instead of citizen scientist. So again, what I do is I photograph bees in their environment. I also document their behavior, notate the plants they're on, and then I keep track of things like times, dates, and weather. So I actually have an Excel sheet that I update every single year with each location that I visit. Yeah, so how I got started. I don't know if anyone's seen this quote before, but if the bee disappeared off the surface of the globe, then man would only have 4 years of life left. No more bees, no more pollination, no more plants, no more animals, no more man. So I actually saw that on Facebook, and I, like pretty much everyone else who saw it, thought it was real. So it turns out this quote is actually, Einstein never said this quote. It's also not true either, but it's what got me started. And I, again, like most people who read this, thought it was about honeybees. So I actually went out into the world and I was like, I'm going to help save the honeybees. So I was just taking pictures of a whole bunch of bees, just honeybees though. So just like a lot of pictures, and I was just going out with my cell phone and taking these. But then I took this photo, And this is clearly a bee, but it's not a honeybee. And at the time, I thought beekeepers were actually bee experts. So I went back to my beekeeping friends and I asked them, hey, what kind of bee is this? And none of them actually knew. So of all places I turned to Facebook, and there was a group called Native Bees of America. And this group had a lot of people in there who were entomologists and militologists. And I actually found out through this group that militologists were bee experts, not beekeepers. So a militologist is a scientist who studies bees. And they told me right away that this was a native bee, which is a bee that's native to America. And she's also a female andrina, which is a mining bee. So this kind of like changed everything I was thinking about bees, because one, I thought honeybees were from here. And I thought, hey, we need to save the honeybees, but I guess that wasn't true based on what the militologists were saying. So I ended up going back to all the places I had photographed the honeybees, because I was like, okay, this is where the bees are. And I was looking for native bees. And for whatever reason, I couldn't find them. And I was going out for a really long time and looking. But I ended up, again, back on Facebook. I was looking at the LA Arboretum's Facebook page, and a horticulturalist from a native garden there actually posted pictures of maybe about 4 to 5 species of native bees. And I was like, okay, this is really weird. Why are there so many native species at the Crescent Farm? So I ended up going there, and my first day, I photographed these pictures of about 3 species of bees. And it turns out the Crescent Farm is about an acre of native plants. So I found out through a little bit of research that if you want to look for native bees, you look for native plants. So just want to get into a little bit of the difference between honeybees and native bees, because I know there's a little bit of confusion there. So first off, honeybees are not threatened or endangered. Native bees are potentially threatened or endangered. Honeybees, the ones that are in the US, are from Europe. Native bees are from where they currently reside. So just like native plants, they could be native to the entire United States. They could be native just to California, or even an area as small as your zip code. Honeybees drink water provided by people. Native bees get all of their hydration from plants, so you don't actually need to put water out for them. Honeybees are generalist pollinators, meaning they'll try and pollinate everything, but they actually don't really pollinate anything all that well. They have about a 5% pollination rate. Native bees can be generalist pollinators as well, but they can also be specialist pollinators, meaning they could pollinate potentially just one family of plants. So honeybees are also detrimental to native bees. So honeybees have been known to spread deformed wing disease to bumblebees. So the way this actually happens is there's a mite that lives in a honeybee hive called a varroa mite. And the varroa mite will attach itself to a developing honeybee larva. And then most of the time when the adult grows up, its wings are small, but there are some adults that are carriers and they're not physically affected. So what they'll actually do is they'll go out into different areas, and since they're generalist pollinators, they'll actually infect the pollen of a lot of different plants. And then bumblebees will visit those same plants or those flowers after, and they'll actually pick up that infected pollen, take it back to their hive, and baby bees, they're consume it. So that's what baby bees eat, is pollen. And so we're starting to see a lot of bumblebees with smaller wings. Also, honeybees do outcompete native bees for resources. And I'll get into this a little bit later, but native bees are also threatened by climate change. Honeybees live in colonies. So native bees, 70% are ground nesting, 30% are cavity nesting, and about 90% are solitary. Okay, so specialist pollinators. I always like to start with this bee. This is a Perdita nasuta. This was my very first specialist pollinator, and actually found them on the side of the road in Death Valley. And what's really cool about this bee is it's also my first contribution to citizen science. So if you look at the lower left-hand corner here, you can actually see the male bee, and you could tell he's a male because he has this little facial feature right here, which looks like a duckbill. It's called a clypeus. And this bee, I think it's been studied or first observed in the early 60s. And because of the way a lot of scientists and militologists study bees, no one actually knew what that facial feature was for. So the way a lot of scientists study bees is they'll actually put out a pan with some liquid in there, and pretty much anything flying by will be attracted to it, and then they will die in it. So no one knew what the facial feature was for, because people hadn't been looking at this bee alive. So like what I'm doing and a lot of community scientists are doing is they're looking at these creatures alive. And because of that, within 10 minutes, I actually saw the male bee using the facial feature. So no, it's kind of hard to tell here, but the male is actually trying to mate with the female, and he's grabbing her antenna and he's holding them on either side of his little facial feature, stopping her from flying off. So really positive use of that facial feature there. And another thing that's really cool about this plant, the flowers are yellow, and pretty much everything on the plant is a similar tone of like yellow or red. So it really seems like a lot of different creatures evolved alongside this plant. So I think it's really cool. And this is my most recent specialist pollinator find. I just included this one because it's really, really cool. And I actually found these bees last Monday of last week. So this is a Xerolectis timberlakei. It looks like I forgot to include the T here, but it's timberlakei. So this bee has a symbiotic relationship with Mohavia, typically, which is this flower right here. So what's really cool about this symbiotic relationship is there's another flower involved. So this bee typically isn't attracted to this flower, but this flower, sorry, this is a Mohavia, this is a Mentzelia. So the Mohavia, which is a ghost flower, actually looks like it has a female bee in there. So if you look at the little red dot in the center, this kind of looks like the back of a female bee. So males will think, oh, hey, there's a female bee in here, let me mate with her. So they'll fly in there, try to mate with her, but instead, there's a little trap in here. It'll actually tap the back of the male bee on the back and deposit some pollen on him. So that's how the male bees end up pollinating this flower. But the female bees actually visit the Mentzelia. So here's a male bee waiting for a female here, and they will pollinate this one. So I think that's a really cool relationship. And the way I found these bees is I was actually looking for areas that had both of these flowers. So this is another specialist pollinator that I actually found by looking for the flower. So a lot of times with native bees, since a lot of them have specialist relationships, you find the bee by looking for the flower. And this is actually the smallest known bee in North America, and it's potentially the smallest bee in the world. It's called a Perdita minima. And you can tell how small this bee is by looking at this quarter. This is the flower that the bee is on. So really, really tiny. These bees are a little bit under 2 millimeters. And what's really cool about these guys too is the habitats can be really small. So this entire patch of flowers that these bees are on was about like 2 square feet, so really tiny. And since this was in a xeric like desert region, everything else on this patch of flowers was also very tiny. So this is a Lasioglossum dialectus, which was also on the same patch. And I bring this one up because it's a bee that's known as kind of a bee that's impossible to ID to species. So everyone just says it's subgenus, which is Dialectus. But with cameras getting more advanced, people can go out and take photos of these guys. And I was actually able to get this bee ID'd to species as well. And I think there's about 5 Lasioglossum dialectus bees I've actually had ID'd to species, which is really cool. So it's definitely something that more people can do. But yeah, and then also bring up some other creatures that live on this sand mat. So what's really cool about all of these guys is they're really, really tiny. So this is a wasp that I think is about 1.7 millimeters. These other wasps, this is probably the biggest one, I think probably about 5 millimeters. But in the center here, we have a mite. This is called a Paratarsodomus macropalpus. It's about 0.5 to 0.7 millimeters. And I was just really happy to find it because it's the fastest land animal on Earth relative to its size. So if it was the size of a human, it'd run about 1,300 miles an hour, opposed to like a cheetah, which runs about 60. So just really, really cool habitat that could be even on your sidewalk. All right, and then also symbiotic relationships aren't just in the bee world. This is a wasp. So this is another creature that you can actually identify based on the plant that it's on. But it's not just in the insect world either. And I know it kind of seems like I'm going off topic here, but I'll explain why in a second. So I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with this one, sea anemones and clownfish, especially since Finding Nemo. What's really cool here is the clownfish will actually attract food for the sea anemone to eat, and the clownfish gets protection from the sea anemone because it can't get stung. So mutually beneficial symbiotic relationship. This one is called commensalism, which is a symbiotic relationship where only one creature actually benefits. So this is koalas and eucalyptus leaves. And this was a relationship that was severely impacted by climate change in 2019 and 2020. So pretty much every year there's a giant oceanic temperature gradient that happens between Australia and Eastern Africa. But because of climate change, it really exacerbated it. So Australia was very, very dry during that time, and Eastern Africa had massive floods, even though I know it wasn't on the news as much. But I bring this relationship up because the koala only eats eucalyptus leaves. So koalas that survived the fire in Australia, a lot of them didn't have anything to eat, so they started starving. And I'm bringing this up because the same thing is happening with other creatures like bees, even close to home. And people aren't really paying attention to it as much because koalas are really cute and fluffy. But a lot of times people look at things like bees, wasps, even like the clownfish we were looking at earlier, and they're not as big of a fan of them, so they're not paying attention. So this is just something that's happening a lot in the world. So what can we do? There's a lot of things we can do, but I think the two main things that anyone can do, one, just document to raise awareness, so you can become a community scientist or just slightly interested. You can also plant native plants in your yard. So iNaturalist is a great way to document things. I actually created 2 bee projects, so California native bees and Los Angeles native bees. And I created these because most people are taking pictures of honeybees, so I kind of wanted to exclude those so people can look for native bees in their area. But any organisms that are in your general area, you can actually upload to iNaturalist. I do a lot of IDing, and there's a lot of experts on there that do that as well. So yeah. And this brings me to Arlington Garden in Pasadena, which Southern California, but really, really cool garden. So this bee here, this is a male Xylocopa sonorina. He's a male carpenter bee. And the reason I bring this up is because I still haven't seen this bee since 2018. I saw it really regularly at this garden before then, but I thought it had left the garden or maybe died out there. But Arlington Garden, this was from a picture from their very first nature walk that they did in 2021. Someone spotted the bee. So I bring this up because this is an example of what's potentially happening in nature or in our yards. If there's only one person out there looking, we might miss things. So it's really great to encourage more people to get into community science because we can make more discoveries. We can maybe even rediscover creatures that we might have thought were extinct.
Can I stop you right there?
Sure.
Krystle? So I was going to say, if you want to see a Xylocopa sonorina, come to my yard, because last year I had a regular Xylocopa visitor, the teddy bear, the male. He would come every day at 5 o'clock, like clockwork.
Oh, really?
It was the coolest thing. Like, I didn't see him earlier, but I would go out 4:30, 5 o'clock, and sure enough, he'd come by to the Facilia, and that was his regular gig. But you're making me think that, even if a few of us are on iNaturalist, like on our blocks, that would be, maybe the teddy bear bee isn't visiting my flower patch necessarily one year, but it might be visiting somebody else's, right?
Yeah.
Well, hopefully we'll have iNaturalist blocks.
Yeah. Yes, that would be great.
Thank you for letting me interrupt.
Oh, no problem. Yeah. So like what's really cool too about what she was talking about. So these bees, the males, they'll actually pick a certain area and just kind of guard it as their territory. And they wait for a female to come by. So this one is by redbud, which carpenter bees love. They love flowering trees. So if you see this bee there one day, it's probably going to start showing up really regularly, just waiting for any female to come by. And they act really aggressive around you, but they don't have stingers, so they just kind of try to intimidate you off, but they're really, really cute. So yeah, Santa Monica Mountains, place that I absolutely love visiting. This is kind of a tie-in between bees and flowers again. So you can actually predict what bees are out based on what flowers are out. So these are morning glories. And when these flowers start to bloom in Southern California, they started to bloom already. I even saw some in December, but typically like late February, early March, they start to bloom. But when this flower blooms, you actually start to see this bee. And I know you guys have it up in your area too. So this is a female Diadacia by tuberculata. And this is a male and female keeping the population growing. So what's really cool about these bees? So these are solitary bees, but they live in aggregations and they have their own little house that has a chimney on there that they actually make. So this is a female constructing one. And this is a female who's actually sleeping in one. So you can see her little legs here covered with pollen, and these are her little tiny feet sticking out. So I'm not sure if she just couldn't fit down her turret or not, but yeah, it's something I see like semi-regularly. They create these turrets to stop rain from getting into the burrows. And also there's a lot of parasitic flies and wasps that also try to like throw eggs in there or go inside to parasitize their babies. So this stops those creatures from doing that. And this is an aggregation that my friend James Carey actually filmed. He's been going to these aggregations for like 4 or 5 years and just recording them like every single day for about 3 months. So this aggregation had about 100,000 bees in it, which is sort of ridiculous. So normally they're not this large, but yeah, these are all solitary bees living together in an aggregation. It's kind of like a neighborhood. So they have their own little house. They just live together for protection. And you can actually walk amongst them and they don't sting. So most native bees, I've never been stung by one. They usually don't sting. But yeah, I think these guys are really cool.
That is an absolutely amazing video.
Right?
I've seen these turrets actually on the beach
Yeah.
in Pacifica here in the Bay Area. Not Rockaway Beach. Yeah, Rockaway Beach. One year I saw these little turrets and I was, what are these? What are these things? And they're put together with they're very hard, right? As well.
They are, yes.
And yeah, it later on when I think I saw a presentation and I'm like, that's what it was. And sure enough, there were bees coming in and out.
Yeah, it's really cool. So it's not just Diadacia bees that do it. There are also some Anthophora that do it as well. But they normally do it on like walls or really cool bees though. So 2 other bees that you'll start to see when the morning glories are out are longhorn bees. This one's a Eucera. You could tell he's a longhorn bee because he has these really long antennas. The females don't have that. And we also have a Duphora, which this is a male who's actually sleeping inside of one of the morning glories. Some other plants that start to bloom really early. We have the deerweed here and sunflowers or asters. So like Asteraceae, when those start blooming, you'll start to see these bees. So these top 2 are Anthophora. They're different species. You could tell this one's a male because he has the clipeus facial feature. So it's not like a duck face like the other bee, but it is a hard facial plate without hair. He also doesn't have any hair on the back legs, which is where Anthophora typically carry pollen. But you can see this Anthophora female does not have the clipeus facial feature, but she does have the fluffy back legs, which is where she'll carry the pollen. And Anthophora and Habropoda bees are almost completely identical. You just have to get a shot of their wings to tell them apart. But again, you can see the clipeus facial feature on the male here. This is a Hoplites bee, and she actually doesn't collect pollen on her back leg. She's really dark, so it's hard to see, but she has really thick plumose hair or like branched hair on the underside of her abdomen. So that's where she carries her pollen. This is really cool. So this is a parasitic bee. It's called a Brachymolectica californica. And they don't actually create their own burrows or nests. So these are parasites of Anthophora. So if you have the Anthophora bees around like these 2, You might see the Brachymolectica. So what they actually do is they'll sneak into the ground nesting burrow of one of the Anthophora bees. They'll lay an egg. Their egg will hatch and it'll either consume the egg or the larva of the host bee, and it'll also eat all of the pollen that the host mother provisioned for its young. What's also really cool about this too is when they sleep on the stems like this, they actually kind of look like bird poop. So if you're ever in your yard and you see a lot of bird poop, there's a lot of creatures that actually kind of look like bird poop, but this bee is one of them. This is also a male megachile, or a leafcutter bee. You can tell he's a male because he has a lot of facial hair. This is a female hoplites, and you can see actually the pollen on the underside of her abdomen. This is a male osmia. Giveaway that he's a male. Again, the facial hair, also really long antennae. And there's the Brachymolectica close up. I just think they're really cool looking bees. So this is climate change close to home. This is the Santa Monica Mountains. I don't know if you guys have ever visited Southern California, but this area is beautiful. So I don't know what's going to happen to it this year because of all the rain, but the last 3 years, we've had massive, massive droughts. So this is what it ended up looking like by early July. But I bring this up because this is a biodiverse, healthy ecosystem. But because it's so biodiverse, it's also really beautiful. So a lot of people have started moving in there. But also with climate change, there's a lot of fires. So people are actually worried about their houses, obviously. So they've actually asked a certain conservancy to go through and actually start cutting down a lot of the flora in the area. So they actually started going through with like a tractor and a bulldozer. This is an area that I was visiting really, really regularly. I stopped visiting regularly in 2021 because they came through the week of the 4th of July because they were anticipating a lot of fireworks and just basically plowed everything down. But in the first 6 months of the year I was there, I actually photographed 41 species of bees. And I was really disappointed when they went through with the tractor because I didn't see any bees after. And I was really hoping last year the bees would start to come back. The mallows that were in the area started to come back. So did the deerweeds. So did the morning glories. But then right after it started to kind of sprout up again, they came through with the tractor and cut it back. So I think this is an area that probably is going to be devoid of bees for a while if they keep doing that. But I just wanted to include some pictures of some of the 41 species of bees that were here and are no longer present. Yeah, so some really beautiful bees that were there. Okay, so I was talking about biodiversity hotspots before. So California is a biodiversity hotspot. And this is actually a biodiversity map. It's the first of its kind that includes a lot of creatures that are normally like left out of these, like insects, mollusks, a lot of just smaller creatures. But yeah, if you notice here, it's dark red. So dark red, highest biodiversity. So you can see that here. So what's really cool about California in regards to bees, there's 4,000 species of bees in the US. In California, we have, as of last year, someone actually counted 1,643 species. So quite a large percentage of the bees in the US are in California. And the Biden administration last year, I think it was beginning of last year, put in an initiative called 30 by 30. So currently 13% of the US is protected land. They want to change that to 30% by the year 2030. So it's called 30 by 30. So hopefully that happens. And then I know some people always wonder, why is California such a biodiversity hotspot? It's basically because of where it is located on the continent. So we have a Mediterranean climate here. And basically Mediterranean climate it's always on the western side of the continent. And it's by a large body of water, normally with a desert on the east side. So you can see that in all of these areas highlighted green. These are also Mediterranean climates. And what's really cool about this, so Mediterranean climates are only 2%, about 2% of the Earth's surface, but we make up about 20% of the Earth's biodiversity. So there it is close up too. So a lot of times it's called like Mediterranean vegetation. It's also called chaparral, and a subcategory of the chaparral biome is coastal sage shrub, which is wet chaparral. Another really unique feature is when it rains in Mediterranean climates. So typically other climates they get summer rainfall. We get winter rainfall, although it's kind of going a little bit longer this year. Another thing that's really cool in the Santa Monica Mountains is the Santa Monica Conservancy actually has started to see the value of land as just leaving it alone, basically. So they know that this is a biodiverse ecosystem. So before anyone wants to build on the area now, they have to actually prove that there's not a value to the biodiversity there. So I think that's a really great way that they're slowing down the development, hopefully. I mean, this was just implemented last year, like almost exactly a year ago, but I think it's a really positive thing, and I hope it starts happening in more areas of California. So on to Borrego. This is really cool because this is a bee I photographed in 2021. This is called a Megachile brownie. This is a resin bee. So I know most people, when they think of Megachile, they think of leafcutter, but still in the same genus. What's really cool about this bee is it's only been seen 3 times in the last 25 years. And this is also the first living photo of a representative of this species. And when I actually went out there to, I was looking for this specific bush that it's on, but I was looking for a bee that had a symbiotic relationship with it. And then I saw this bee as well. So I was like, oh, let me take a picture. And then when I went home, I confirmed with a militologist friend of mine what species it was. And when I realized, hey, this bee hasn't been photographed or seen, I think 2008 was the last time it was collected. I was like, I got to go out again. So it was beginning of July. And the day I photographed this bee, I think it was a little over 100, and I couldn't go out again for another week. So during that week, it had been like 110 degrees the entire week. So again, climate change. So this is what the bush is supposed to look like. This is what it looked like when I was there. And it looked even worse the second visit. But yeah, the day I went back, it was a Saturday. It actually hit 117 degrees. And I was like, oh my gosh, I hope these plants are still blooming. I got there at like 4 a.m. And when I opened my car door around like 5:30, when the sun was starting to come up, just heard this like really, really loud hum. And I just instantly knew what it was because I'd been hearing that hum a lot because it'd been so dry. These bushes were actually covered with honeybees, and this is out in the middle of the desert, so there's nothing around. So they were just basically taking over these bushes. And I was walking around them and I didn't see any native bees. We're like almost exactly a week before I'd seen maybe about 100 native bees. And just randomly, it wasn't on the forecast. It actually started raining. It rained for about 5 minutes. And when it did, the hum completely disappeared. I didn't see any of the bees. I don't know where they went. But when it stopped raining, I got out of my car again, walked around the bushes again, and I saw just this one female. So this was the only female I saw that day, and it was the Megachile brownie, and she was drying herself off. So I was able to get a lot of really, really cool photos of her. I went back last year to this same bush, and the climate change had made the plants even worse there. So I didn't actually see any native bees, but I was just really happy that I got to see at least her. So that's kind of a combination of what's happening when like honeybees are being introduced to the world, or different ecosystems, and climate change. As far as native landscaping, this is my friend Paloma's yard. So I just want to talk about some things you can do in your own yards to help not just native bees, but have a healthy biodiverse yard. Watershed landscaping, I think, is a really great thing to do. So what is a watershed approach? Basically, it's a area that drains into a common waterway, such as a stream, a lake, estuary, wetland, aquifer, even the ocean. So you'll see it here, basically where the rocks are. You see this is lower elevation below the area where the mulch is. So basically the water just collects and drains into there. So there's 3 key principles. You want to build a healthy living soil that's biologically diverse and has developed a structure like a sponge to hold in a lot of water. And what's really cool about this too is the soil is like actually a healthy biodiverse ecosystem. So you'll see things like earthworms, bacteria, arthropods, fungi, etc. A lot of other things in there. So a lot of times healthy biodiverse ecosystems have creatures in there that we don't necessarily like, but they're part of the system. And if we remove them, it's actually kind of like playing a game of Jenga, where you remove bricks, but if you remove too many bricks, too many things you don't like, the whole thing will actually start tumbling down. You can also treat rainwater as a resource, which was really great to do when there were droughts. I think when there's about an inch of rain, I think you can get like a couple 100 gallons of water. So a lot of times people are like storing water and they're using it to just water their lawns as they like later on. Yeah, and then also plant native flora. So back to my friend Paloma's yard. I actually went to the yard after she posted this photo on Instagram. I'd never visited her house before, and I was like, oh my gosh, I got to visit your yard. It looks beautiful. So yeah, the first day I went there, I photographed about, I think it might have been over the first 2 times I went there, but I photographed about 15 species of bees. So this first one here is a Xylocopa sonorina. So this is the female to the orange bee that we saw earlier. And it's one of the 3 large carpenter bees in California. You can tell this one's a sonorina because she has orange tinted wings. This is a sweat bee. This is an Agapostemon texanus, and she's collecting pollen on the underside of her abdomen and her back leg. You can tell this is a male osmia bee, again, because the long antennae, also has a lot of facial hair there. This is a female Halictus farinosus. So this is, there's basically like 4 Halictus bees in California. This one you could tell it's a farinosus because she's one of the larger ones, and she also has brown wings. But yeah, again, collects pollen underside of her abdomen and back legs. But what's also really cool about my friend Paloma's yard is she has this bee. So this is a Perdita interrupta, and it's only an adult above ground for 1 month. So April is that month. So if you have a California poppy as well as a popcorn plant, Cryptantha, in your yard, you might have this pollinator, and it's a really uncommon bee to see. I've only seen it twice, but Paloma has a huge population in her yard, and I think it's just really cool. So since this bee is a poppy specialist, so poppies only produce pollen. They don't actually produce nectar. So whenever there's a bee or something that's a specialist on a poppy, they also have to have a relationship with another plant. So this one, the female, or both of them actually drink nectar from the Cryptantha or the popcorn plant. And what's really cool about these bees is the males are super easy to find. They spend their entire adult lives waiting on the poppy for a female to show up. And when they do, they just jump on there and keep working on continuing the population. So that's really cool. But also, not only does Paloma have that rare bee in her yard, she also has this bee, which is a Bombus crotchii. It's one of the 4 endangered bumblebees in California. And it's, I would say, the most commonly seen of the endangered bees. I actually didn't take this picture in her yard. I took it at the Crescent Farm at the LA Arboretum. But after I left her yard, she actually just started walking around looking for other bees, and she saw one flying by. So I think it was really cool. She ended up getting a picture of it too. So just really cool yard. Also maintaining a native environment. I'm sure a lot of you guys know this already because you're from the California Native Plant Society, but native environment either doesn't need any pesticides or herbicides or very little, because it if it has a healthy biodiverse ecosystem, like a Jenga game with all of the blocks still in it, it'll sustain itself really well. And also these things harm more than just their intended targets. So let's say, like with pesticides, which kill insects that benefit plants, let's say Paloma in the yard I just mentioned didn't like the California poppy bee, the Perdita interrupta. And so she sprayed a bunch of pesticides who would pollinate the poppies. And for whatever reason, let's just say she didn't like poppies, so she sprayed a bunch of herbicides. Where would the Perdita interrupta go? So yeah. So if you do have a healthy biodiverse yard, there's some creatures that I think you should look out for. I call them indicator insects. This one is a wasp, and its life cycle actually relies on a creature a lot of us consider pests. And this wasp, a lot of people don't notice that they have it in their yard because it's really tiny. So this is a male actually next to a quarter. So really, really tiny wasp. And this wasp is basically population control. There it is at Arlington Garden. Population control for aphids. So like I was saying before, I know a lot of times there are creatures that people don't like in their yard, but having aphids in your yard is actually not a bad thing. If you have a healthy biodiverse ecosystem, you'll have things that will actually control the population of the aphids naturally that you don't have to actually introduce. And this wasp is one of them. So what actually happens with this relationship is the female wasp will actually do something called ovipositing. Well, she'll poke an egg into the body of the aphid. And then sometimes if you see these aphid bodies like swollen up like a balloon, like in this picture, you'll know that you have the wasp too if you haven't seen it. So the wasp is actually using the aphid like a cocoon. And then when the wasp is an adult, it's ready to eclose or exit. It'll chew a little hole out the back of the aphid right there. It looks like a little cap. And then you know you have some of the adult wasps around. Another creature I call an indicator insect, which is also really cool, lacewing larva or lacewings. So this is the egg, and the females actually lay them on a little stalk like this to protect them. This is the larva. So the larva consume mealybugs, thrips, also aphids. This is an adult, really cool. And this is one of the thrips that these creatures actually consume. And you can tell how small it is because this is a little grain of pollen. And what's also really cool too is I actually photographed all of these creatures on a single patch of sunflowers. So I was talking about ecosystems can be really small before, like with the Perdita minima, that 2 square foot area. This was just like a very tiny patch of sunflowers with all these creatures living on them. So really, really cool. Some plants that you can have in your yard. I think these will attract a lot of generalist pollinators. So you can have buckwheat. You can also have salvia, asteraceae, which again, asters or sunflowers. So sunflowers will attract a lot of bees to just like sleep on, but a lot of bees also pollinate them. There are some specialists of sunflowers as well, but this is a really great place to actually like photograph bees or just observe them. These are all male longhorn bees. Again, you can see they have the long antennae. These are actually Melistotus. So unlike the Eucera that have the fully black long antennae, these have bicolored antennae. So they're orange on the underneath, and you can kind of tell that they're sort of dark brown on the top. So the males compete with each other all during the day, but at night they either huddle together on like a sunflower or a stem of some sort of plant to sleep on. It's really cute. Kind of mentioned this before, but this is the California poppy, and this is the cryptantha or the popcorn flower that I was talking about before that the Perdita interrupta will consume nectar from. So that's the Perdita interrupta. Again, that's a male bee. He's just sleeping on a poppy. Close-up picture. Globe mallows are also another really cool flower to have in your yard. There's actually bees that will sleep in them. This one's collecting pollen. You can tell it's a female just because of that back leg with all of that hair on there. But what's really cool about globe mallows, this is also another good place to photograph bees. So they open and close with the sun, and there's certain bees like a diadacia that'll actually crawl into them right before they close in the evening, and they'll sleep inside them. And then when the sun comes out the next day, the flower will open up and the bee will come out and just start foraging again. So yeah, these are diadacia that were sleeping in the flowers. Also, if you have squash in your yard, there's a squash bee. So this is a Eucera pepinapis prunosa. It used to be called a Pepinapis prunosa, but now it's in the genus Eucera. So this is another longhorn bee. You can spot the male by the little clippiest facial feature. The female has the back puffy legs with all the pollen on there. So this is a really early morning riser. I think the flowers open up around like 5:30 normally. So yeah, the males spend their entire adult life inside the bloom of the flower, waiting for the female to show up, and the females nest right under the plants. And these guys are done foraging by like noon. So if you go out afternoon, you probably won't see these bees. Sort of mentioned this one before. This is a redbud plant. These will attract carpenter bees. So carpenter bees love flowering trees, but you can also attract megachile or the leafcutter bees with them. So if you see redbud leaves that look like this, these are actually cut out by the female bees. So they cut these little crescent shapes out, roll them up kind of like a burrito, take them back to their cavity nest, and they actually wrap up their brood chambers that their eggs are developing in there. So I just think that's really cool. This is a female that was on a Asteraceae. You could tell, again, female because of the long hair on the underside of her abdomen. And then this is, again, the male female of the Xylocopus honorina. Plant stems, also another great thing to have in your yard. So about 30% of bees are cavity nesting. So they, not all of them are in hollow plant stems, but a lot of them will nest in them. So if you actually leave about 12 to 18 inches in your yard, you'll have bees like this one, which is a Seratina bee, which is a small carpenter bee. They're normally about 7 to 9 millimeters. And they nest in the pithy stem. So if you have like a spongy center of like a plant, they'll nest in those. So this is the male. You can tell again from the clippiest facial feature. Female has just a single line. Also the hair on the back leg. I think I'm running over a little bit, so I'll kind of go a little bit faster. But yeah, also if you keep like grasses like Bouteloua gracilius, this is one of my favorite plants to look at for sleeping bees in your yard. So grass, stems, a lot of different flora bees will sleep on, specifically male bees. These are some male longhorn bees, which are, I think they're on, this might be salvia. I can't really tell. But yeah, again, you can see the bicolored antennae. So that's how you know these are Melisotis. Also, you'll see Anthophora. These are on a red bud. These are males again. This is another parasitic bee, which is sleeping on some grass. So this is a nomada bee. I mentioned the other bee before that looked like bird poop, another kleptoparasitic bee. Penstemon, another great flower to have in your yard. It attracts a lot of bees, but you'll also find bees sleeping in it. This is a male that was sleeping in one. I kind of scared him when I took his picture and he hung out on top, and I got some really good photos of him there. Oh, this is a Halictus farinosus male. And male leafcutter bee sleeping on a stalk. Also, Xerces Society has this great program, which I think is really great. If you have a yard, great to follow this. It's called Leave the Leaves. So leaves work as a great blanket for overwintering creatures like queen bumblebees, but also butterflies, wasps. Yeah, they just act like a blanket, and they also really help enrich the soil. So this is actually preferable to mulch, but if you do decide to put mulch in your yard, no more than 2 inches, because it kind of makes it impossible for a lot of creatures to actually nest in them over winter. And as far as bee houses, personally, not a huge fan of bee houses, but if you're going to have them, there's a couple of places that you could look at. I think Bee houses is probably one of the best bee house places I've seen. So they actually make them deep enough for bees to nest in. They're about 6 inches deep, but they're also designed to be cleaned. Then you can also do observations in these. So it's really important to clean a bee house at the end of the bee season, because it's kind of like say it's like a dog house. If your dog stayed outside 24/7 and they just lived in their dog house and you never cleaned it out, their dog could get sick. Not saying that you should ever do that, but the same thing happens with these bees. So the bee houses are designed to be cleaned, and Bee House has actually sent me one of theirs, just because I think this is a really great house if you do decide to get one. So the thing about native bees is typically cavity nesting bees will actually lay the egg of a male closer to the entrance and a female closer to the back. That's why males are typically smaller than females. They take less time to develop, and they also emerge first. So you can actually take these apart, clean them out at the end of the season. And if you do get a bee house, always get one that has a drawer in it. So after you're finished cleaning out the cavities, you can actually put all of the cocoons in the drawer. And that way the males and the females can emerge in the order that they're supposed to. Yeah, so then also wanted to bring up some bee houses that are not appropriate. I know this one went viral on social media a couple of years ago. It's called Bee Bricks. So if you notice here, this one's actually not 6 inches deep, so it's not deep enough for bees. It's also really hard to clean these out because it's made of, I think, cement. But yeah, so this is not a great house for bees. Yeah, I do think like one thing you can do if you do have a bee house where you can't actually take apart the cells is you can get a biodegradable paper straw and you can actually stick those in the cells. So when it's the end of the bee season, you can actually take the straws out, unravel them, and then put them in a drawer similar to the top of like weebie houses. And then the cocoons can hatch when they're ready to. Yeah. So this is also a kind of example of what can happen if you have a bee house that you never clean it out. These are mites that have just started to build up because they were never cleaned. And then also you can have basically transfer mites to bees that weren't affected when they're mating. So you can see that happening here. So some instructional videos, I'll leave this up for a second just so you can watch it. So if you guys do have bee houses, these videos are really, really great instructional videos for how to clean your bee house, how to clean the cocoons. So I'll just leave that up for a little bit if you guys want to watch it. Cool. All right, I'm going to move on, but yeah. Okay, so I also mentioned this before, you don't need to leave water out for native bees. So if you do leave water out for for bees in your yard, you're only going to attract one kind of bee, and it's not a native one, it's going to be a honeybee. So I just included some samples of people who leave water out for bees, and if you notice, every single one of these bees is a honeybee. So yeah, you're actually going to be attracting a invasive farm animal basically to your yard. If you do want to help a native bee that's maybe like down or like it's been cold or maybe stuck inside your house and hasn't been able to eat anything for a while, this is on my hand. So this was actually at my friend's house. She had this carpenter bee stuck between her windows and she was really scared that she might get stung. So she waited about 5 hours for me to come over and get her. But what I did was actually made a mixture of water and sugar. So it's 3 parts water and 1 part sugar. You just mix it up together. The bee will drink it, basically energize them again, and they'll fly off in a few minutes, which is what she did. You never want to give a bee honey because the honey can potentially contain pathogens. You might want to do it with a honeybee if you know that honeybee came from the hive where the honey that you have is from. So then just to kind of wrap it up here, I wanted to go over some of my goals. So I want to photograph the 4 endangered bumblebees in California. I've only photographed 1 so far. I went to the Trinity Alps was it the year before? Yeah, the year before last year. Wow. To try and photograph 1. Did not happen. I'm going back to the Trinity Alps and the Sierras this year to try and do that again. Also want to encourage more people to get into community science. So not just bee science, but also like any kind of science. But with bees, most people just think of honeybees, and I want people to think of the other 20,000 species in the world, which I think are more important. Also want to promote and create native landscaping bridges. So this is like if my friend Paloma, for example, decided to move, and the people who decided to move into her house wanted to put in just like a green lawn, what would happen to all of the creatures that were in that biodiverse ecosystem, like that rare Perdita interrupta? Where would those bees go? So if you encourage your friends or your neighbors to put in just little areas of native plants, these creatures would have options of places to go. Also want to finish a coffee table book this year, release some bee flashcards, which I actually have a Kickstarter going for now, and it was just fully funded, I think 2 days ago. So the cards are definitely happening. And then I want to leave you guys with this video, which I think is absolutely amazing. It's called My Garden of 1,000 Bees. It's free to watch on PBS, and it's this guy's basically quarantine project, and it's so amazing. He has a really healthy native ecosystem in his backyard. He's in Bristol, England, and he just filmed all the bees there, and it's such a cool thing. So My Garden of 1,000 Bees on PBS, definitely check it out. So yeah, thank you.
Yay! Oh my goodness. Amazing. I'm blown away. I could listen to this talk probably over and over and over, Krystle, because you cover so much. And you've dove, dived. You've just deep dived so much into the world of native bees in such a very, just complete way. And the fact that you say, that you started off wanting to photograph honeybees and, then learned about native bees because you thought the honeybees were the ones with the flight. And
Yeah,
a lot of folks, that's where a lot of folks are, right?
yeah.
So, how cool that, the native bees took you on this journey, and you have so much talent and observational skills and patience, to follow them and let them show you their world, and show and share it with us. Thank
Yeah.
you so much. I'm just going to ask you a couple of quick questions.
Cool.
One of them that I thought you might cover, but one was, what kind of camera do you use and how do you capture them? Because the bees, Marcia Matson says most native bees in my yard don't settle down so much, so they're hard to photograph.
Yeah, I guess I'll answer this in two parts, like on tips how to photograph these bees and then also what I use. So I use a crop sensor DSLR, which is a Nikon D500. Although I'm getting a Z9, which is a mirrorless Nikon Z9, which I think tomorrow. Yay. But I also use a Nikkor 105 f2.5 f2.8 millimeter lens. So the 105 is basically the distance between the sensor of the camera and the object that you're photographing. So I like to use like something 105 because it gives you more working distance, because there are ones that are like I think there's like an 85 millimeter and a 50 millimeter, but you have to get closer. And then I have diopters, 2 diopters that I put on the front of that lens, which are magnifying glasses. So one of them is a Raynox 150. So that's for photographing like the whole flower and the bee. There's a 250 that I use, which you can just get like the face photographed. I also have a Laowa 25 millimeter, which is for anything that's under, like I'd say 5 millimeters. And then I have a Laowa 15 millimeter, which is a wide angle macro. So it photographs the bees, but also their entire environment. So it kind of gives you a story in the photographs. And then I also use a flash as well, because it freezes the action. And then I have a diffuser that I put over the flash, so it doesn't have any like hot spots or like white spots on the photos. And then as far as photographing the bees, I think one of the best things you can do before you even start photographing them is just kind of watching them. So if you do watch that documentary, My Garden of a Thousand Bees, like he even starts to notice it, like the male bees have certain patterns, or like you've noticed it in your yard with the Xylocopa sonorina, this bee comes back at 5 p.m. every day. So you'll start to notice that. And like with a lot of bees, if you have like stock plants, like it kind of has a center and the flowers wrapped around it, you'll start to notice the bees kind of like circle it at the top. So you can actually position yourself at one of the flowers, focus there, take a photo. Also, again, if you have like flowering plants with like male bees sleeping out on them, you can go in the morning, afternoon, midday as well. Another thing I like to do is if you see like a bush that has a lot of bees on it, I'll actually wave my hand over it. So there's a shadow, and a lot of them will scatter, but there's normally like a few of them that don't. So that's how I got the photos of the Perdita minima, which potentially the smallest bee in the US. You just look for the ones that don't move.
That sounds like the equivalent to like bird calls. Wave your
Yeah.
hands.
Oh, yeah, I guess like, yeah. Or like a Jedi mind trick.
Yeah,
Yeah.
do the Jedi wave over the plant.
Yeah.
You're getting all the accolades and thank yous and inspiring talk, and anyone hearing this will want to become more observant. Your technical expertise coupled with your patience and observation is just amazing and really inspiring. I wanted to share one thing. Oh, this what a great way to kick off Women's History Month. Well, not kick off, but celebrate Women's History Month, and also International Women's Day. So Krystle, thank you so much for everything you do, how you see the world, how you're capturing it, how you're sharing it. Folks, please, yeah, support, get those cards. If you want to learn about native bees in your area, and share that with students, with children, and with anybody who you think would be curious about this. Oh, I remember, it was the metallic sweat bees. Those guys are funny because they're very territorial and they'll come at you like, get out of here. I don't want you here. But that's just like all show. And then
Yeah,
all
they can't do anything.
sit on a rock and sun themselves.
Yeah, it's funny because yeah, male bees, they can't sting. So they just try and like intimidate you to drive you off. So they can't really do anything.
Yeah. All right. So I think we'll end there just because it is 8:04. I want to respect your time and everybody else's as well. Krystle, again, thank you so much. And everybody, this recording will be uploaded to our YouTube channel. So if you miss part of it, it will be there later on for all to see. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
And with that, I'm going to stop the recording.